I don't know how many things one person in a lifetime can do, but obviously he does it. So I am greatly pleased to introduce to you Fredo Arias King from Texas.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here in New Hampshire just for the second time in my life. But I was telling my friends that I've made more friends in the past 2 days than I think I have back home. So April 7th of 2000, almost exactly 15 years ago, there was an overlooked foreign policy decision by presidential candidate George W. Bush, which had repercussions far beyond then and now. So we're here to visit that decision and how it relates to the now. So why foreign policy? Why does it matter? The U.S., and this is kind of overlooked most of the time, is very sensitive in its domestic politics to the results of foreign entanglements. Several U.S. presidents I can think of just off the top of my head, just this past century or the past 100 years, owe their presidency to some foreign entanglement and the results thereof. Sometimes good, like Eisenhower, right? Sometimes not so good, like when Carter messed up 2 or 3 shocks that came from outside, and that's how we got Ronald Reagan. Of course, there isn't a single president that I can think of that owes his presidency more to a foreign entanglement than Barack Obama, when he voted against the Iraq invasion. And when that invasion became discredited, well, guess what? And Hillary voted in favor of that invasion. So I cannot think of a single Mexican president in that same time period that owes his presidency to a foreign entanglement. So that's how the U.S. needs to be careful about some of these things, because they have repercussions in domestic politics the way electricity travels through copper wire. At that time, in 2000, we were fighting in Mexico. For what? We were supporting the candidacy of Vicente Fox to end 71 years of a very corrupt system, statist system, that has kept the country in poverty, in dependence, in all kinds of other, nefarious things. For 71 years, that party had been ruling Mexico. Its opposition, Christian Democratic, pro-business, not anti-American, that wanted for Mexico what the Polish reformers did for Poland after the collapse of communism, what Chile did to its own economy, which made it a first world country in just 3 decades. Who was our opponent? The regime was running, in order to perpetuate its 71 years for another 6 or so, was running the head of the political police. His name was Francisco Labastida Ochoa. Now, Francisco Labastida was not only the head of the political police, which was engaged in all kinds of human rights violations, electoral fraud. It had all these things under its control. But he, as governor of the northern state of Sinaloa, had a track record of scandals involving the cartels, among other things. And according to the Washington Times, according to Bill Gertz, who's an expert there, he also appeared on the DEA list in the United States. That's the Drug Enforcement Administration. So our Mexican delegation during this campaign met, of course, as a matter of course, with our counterparts inside both the Republican and the Democratic parties and their respective presidential candidacies. This was every 12 years, Mexico and the U.S. have an election more or less at the same time. And in the Republican Party, that would have been Condoleezza Rice, who I knew from already many years because she, like me, is a Sovietologist, an expert on Russia, and this gentleman named Robert Zoellick. So what happened that April 7th of 2000? In a meeting in Los Angeles between Governor, future President George Bush, W. Bush, with the wife of the political police chief, Labastida, of the regime. Effusive meeting where they spoke about, well, Bush spoke about how the education platforms between his campaign and that of Mr. Labastida coincide, mentioning all kinds of details about their coincidences. This from a man that cannot name the president of some key allies at that time. We proposed, insisted in fact, that he also, because, this was being trumpeted by the regime back home as yet another international endorsement to continue their 71 years. And we knew the Bush family had a long history of business relations with the PRI, including going back all the way to Prescott Bush. So we insisted, as a matter of course, that the candidate also meet with Vicente Fox's daughter, who was the first lady of our campaign. And, well, they prevaricated. Condoleezza basically eventually said, well, talk to Robert Zoellick. And Robert Zoellick and I exchanged a few emails and a lot of phone calls. And he said, well, it's not easy. Well, the candidate is busy. Well, that was not on purpose. Finally, he had to admit that it was pre-planned. It was on purpose. But he also answered me, something I'll never forget. Sorry, Fredo. We only play with the big boys. Fortunately, again, much of this was in emails. We had those emails going back and forth. And at that time, and even today, the Bush family admitted and admits that Mexico in the year 2000 was a dictatorship. How do I know they still admit this? I was just in Dallas at the library, the Bush Library and Museum, and there was a map of the world. And if you press the year 2000, it lists the countries that are democratic. This globe even lights up. Mexico was not one of them. So they knew. A few days later, the governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, also received a delegation from Mr. Labastida's party. And he also took their picture. It was effusive. It was, I love Mexico kind of thing. We also proposed to the Jeb Bush and the governor, officially the government of Florida, to have the same opportunity with Fox's daughter or anyone else from our delegation to balance things out. There was never any reply. Fox, of course, knew all this. At that time, Vicente Fox was the good guy who was not going to win. Former Coca-Cola executive, boot-wearing gentleman rancher from a Christian Democratic Party. His grandfather hailed from Ohio. But he was not going to win. In fact, it took everybody by surprise when that July 2nd, Fox wins. Oops. Now what happened? Fox, who had never made any anti-American comments or was sympathetic to the Republicans, I guess, or Democrats, why not? He forced George W. Bush to call 4 times before he took his congratulatory call. Now, mind you, Bush was still candidate Bush. Fox was president-elect Bush. Bush was scared. He went all out. He went all out to, in a way, apologize, I guess, to Fox and to show that he loves Mexico, that he was going to make Mexico the #1 priority. Flew immediately, to try to meet with Fox and all this. Our delegation had the red carpet in Philadelphia. Catherine Harris, the Secretary of State, rolled out that red carpet for us in Philly. Philadelphia, of course, is a Republican convention where I was representing the party of Fox. We had 1 hour with Condoleezza Rice where she basically said, in Russian, I'm sorry, It was all Robert Zelik's idea. Jeb also gave us an impromptu meeting in the hallways of that hotel, where he gave us this long, it seemed long, 12, 15-minute speech, which is summarized, and including about immigration and his views about immigration, which I found a little strange. You can find them if you look in Google, the Center for Immigration Studies, this backgrounder called I Understand Your People. So anyway, they were scared, they said many things. Why did they do this? It's complex. It's very complex, but I can come back another time and explain that. So what? You know, then the U.S. was absent when Mexican democracy was born. So what? They took the side of a dictatorship. So what? Affected relations personally with Fox. Yeah, so. But the main reason why this is a problem was because the Bushes put themselves in the United States in the hands of a foreign country. Why so? My Mexican colleagues, like Fox, were very upset and wanted to spill this into the press. I said, well, no. I dissuaded them from doing that. We actually did that a year later when there was no consequences. It came out in the Washington Post. You can also find that online, in the front page, in fact. But anyway, I dissuaded them and I said, well, Gore did the same to us. Another long story. There's 300,000 voters in Florida of Mexican origin or naturalized Mexicans. All it would have taken was for 300 of them, 1 out of every 1,000 of them, to be turned off by some kind of scandal between Bush and Mexico, to have turned this election to Gore. That Mexican delegation, in other words, had the fate of the United States and of the Bushes in its little pinky, and didn't realize it at the time. Of course, that's only clear in retrospect. So remember, the bad foreign policy decisions have domestic consequences, powerful ones. America has a very delicate sovereignty, and few people realize this. The other day, Jeb Bush released his list of foreign policy advisors. Some are very good. Paula Dobriansky, who I'm sharing a panel with tomorrow, that Fran alluded to in the World Bank. Roger Noriega, he went all out for us. He worked for Senator Jesse Helms. He went all out for us during that election. And Robert Zelik. Sorry, Fredo, we only played with the big boys. A final thought. A final thought. All this mass immigration to the United States reflects a deep disease in Mexico. The elites do not want to reform Mexico because it's against their interests, their easy money, their monopolies. So amnesty immigration opponents in this country are not racists. In fact, you are helping Mexico to reform itself if you force the elites to do the things necessary to keep those immigrants at home. Thank you.